and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the East Sea this morning, ahead of the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju next week. This is the regime's first missile launch in almost 6 months, and the first under the Lee Jae-myung administration. Just 2 days after returning from Washington, South Korea's industry ministry and the presidential chief of staff for policy are set to head back to the United States today, as they continue to work on what appears to be the final stage of trade negotiations. U.S. President Donald Trump expressed optimism about upcoming trade talks with China, saying he expects to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping soon in South Korea. He also touted the success of his tariff policies, saying Washington has done well in trade negotiations with South Korea, Japan, and the European Union. North Korea fired a ballistic missile into the East Sea this morning for the first time in more than 5 months. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said in a text message to local reporters that it detected the missile at around 8:10 a.m. and that it was launched from the regime's Hwangbu province. This marks North Korea's first ballistic missile provocation since President Lee Jae-myung took office in early June. Today's launch comes ahead of the APEC meeting next week and a potential meeting between the leaders of the United States and China in South Korea. On the economic front, South Korean officials are heading back to Washington to fine-tune the details of the Korea-U.S. tariff negotiations. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bum and Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan depart for Washington, D.C. on Wednesday once again for tariff negotiations with the U.S. It has only been a few days since the two officials returned from earlier trips to D.C., during which they talked to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to finalize the details of the $350 billion investment package. Though there are still 1 or 2 remaining issues, the presidential chief of staff for policy had said Seoul had made substantive progress in those talks.
The chances of reaching an agreement have grown compared to previous U.S. visit, especially with the upcoming APEC leaders meeting.
The key issue of the tariff negotiations has been over South Korea's investment package in the U.S. to reduce tariffs on key products such as automobiles. Washington has been demanding a full cash investment or an upfront equity contribution, which Seoul says is unrealistic given the country's foreign exchange constraints. But as the U.S. now appears to have stepped back from this demand, the negotiations recently gained momentum.
Not really. If they were, we wouldn't be able to solve the problem. The U.S. has accepted much of our view on that issue.
With the two officials heading back to the U.S. to finalize the details, expectations are growing that the two countries could reach a dramatic agreement during the potential summit between the two leaders, as President Trump is to visit Korea soon for the APEC leaders meeting. Meanwhile, the impact of U.S. tariffs is starting to show in Korea Customs Service data, with exports to the U.S. for the first 20 days of October plunging 24.7% compared to the previous year. Even considering there were 2 less working days during this period, exports to the U.S. were still down more than 10%. Total exports to all countries from October 1st to 20th totaled $30.15 billion, down 7.8% from the same period last year, largely due to that fall in exports to the U.S. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Despite trade tensions between Washington and Beijing, U.S. President Donald Trump said he expects a fair deal with China, saying he expects to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in South Korea soon. He also highlighted the success of his tariff policies, citing trade negotiations with South Korea, Japan, and the European Union. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed optimism about upcoming trade negotiations with China, saying he expects to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea soon to discuss a wide range of issues. Speaking at a White House luncheon on Monday, President Trump said he believes the two countries will do well in the talks. The remarks come as President Trump moves to impose an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods starting November 1st. If implemented, the overall tariffs that China must pay on exports to the United States could climb as high as 157%. The measure follows Beijing's decision to tighten export controls on rare earth materials, which Washington sees as a strategic challenge to global supply chains. Despite the rising trade tensions, Trump emphasized that he maintains a good personal relationship with President Xi and expects to reach what he described as a fair deal. He said he hopes both sides can benefit, but stressed that any deal must be fair. The U.S. leader added that a meeting with President Xi would be very successful, noting that global attention is focused on the upcoming talks. Still, Trump acknowledged that there remains a chance that the meeting might not happen, saying that if someone were to call it off, it would not be due to hostility, but rather part of the business process. Meanwhile, Trump also highlighted what he views as the broader success of his tariff policies, saying Washington has done well in trade negotiations with South Korea, Japan, and the European Union. He argued that the use of tariffs has strengthened America's negotiating position, helped reduce trade deficits, drawn in new foreign investments, and boosted domestic manufacturing. Pundits say Washington is aiming to use this combination of high tariffs and direct diplomacy to pressure Beijing into concessions, while reassuring allies that Washington remains committed to fair and reciprocal trade. 이승재, Arirang News.
So right after returning home, South Korea's key negotiators are heading back to Washington again to wrap up what could be the final phase of trade negotiations as the country prepares for next week's APEC meeting here in Gyeongju. For more, we're joined by Professor Oh Jun-seok, Dean at the College of Economic and Business at Sookmyung Women's University. Professor Oh, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So Seoul and Washington have yet to agree on the key details of the $350 billion investment deal. What key negotiating cards does South Korea still have when it comes to tariff negotiations?
The major sticking point has been how to structure and finance a $350 billion investment in the U.S. in return for a reduction in so-called reciprocal tariff from 25% to 15%. The U.S. has been pushing an upfront cash injection, which is not that common, while the Korean government has made clear it cannot pay the full amount in cash at once, which is right. The sum should combine direct investment, loan, and loan guarantees as agreed in the original pact. In this way, negotiations have been gridlocked over the structure of investment fund. If you're a licensed financial expert, it might be a violation of prudent man rule of business ethics when you are designing capital structure of a special purpose fund of cash only without leveraged financing, cost sharing, risk hedging, or even loss splitting in time of need. Luckily, Washington is known to have accepted Korea's concern over foreign exchange market instability, softening its earlier demand that the fund be entirely cash-based. To cushion the potential impact on foreign exchange market, Seoul has also requested a currency swap arrangement with Washington. Another unresolved issue is the timing, whether the lower tariff rate would apply immediately or only after the MOU is signed. The APEC meeting, as you mentioned, considered the most likely outcome is a joint statement rather than a legally binding accord or a pact. Seoul, however, is pushing for a Japanese model, seeking to embed detailed terms in its investment pledges to ensure reciprocity. Then what Seoul has as a negotiation card beyond balancing trade and investment of shipbuilding and supply chain, negotiators are also working on a potential update to the U.S.-Korea nuclear cooperation agreement. It is also plausible to take issue on whether to raise its defense spending to 3.5% of GDP, aligning with NATO benchmark. What is certain is the priority is not the timing of a deal, nor the structure of investment fund, but whether the result serves our national interest or not, which is exactly the same with Washington's stance.
Right, and U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to make a state visit to South Korea on October 29th, next week that is. And can we expect a major breakthrough in Seoul-Washington trade talks?
Seoul and Washington summit and Washington-Beijing summit talk might take place during Trump's stay. It is expected also that the U.S. president is highly likely to skip the multilateral summit during the APEC summit meeting. President Trump doesn't like multilateral. Instead, President Trump may hold a bilateral summit with Korea and with China before the APEC gathering opens and depart without attending the main session of the summit. Both Korea and U.S. officials have recently expressed optimism about the breakthrough in their stalled trade talk, as their country's leaders are expected to meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Gyeongju. The U.S. agreed to reduce tariff on import of Korean products in return for Seoul's investing in the U.S., but U.S. auto tariffs are still in place as the countries remain at odds over the details of investment bond in the United States. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made a remark of great importance quite recently when asked whether the two nations can bridge their difference. When asked whether Washington could provide a current swap arrangement Seoul has requested, Secretary Bessent stated that the issue falls under the authority of the U.S. Federal Reserve. But however, the secretary added that if he were chairing the central bank, then Korea would already have a currency swap facility, just like Singapore. It seems Washington is close to wrapping up trade negotiations with Seoul, noting that two sides are ironing out the final structure of the agreement.
Right, and this week we saw South Korean business leaders playing golf with U.S. President Donald Trump. So it seems all hands are on deck to reach a trade agreement. What might have been discussed there, and what's your take on their golf playing?
We have to interpret this event. It's a return of bilateralism before 1995. Ever since 1996, with the advent of WTO, dispute settlement mechanism in the international trade has been settled in multilateralism. In the middle of the related parties, as a green judge, WTO is involved, and then WTO is the center, and then based on fair and free trade, applicable of WTO has made consecutive decisions till now. As a result, WTO has been the playground nowadays of global lobbyists, the international trade and investment. President Trump might pivot this playground from WTO to the U.S. Golf meeting will be an example of how to make good use of playground of the U.S. Amid the ongoing discussion of a tariff between the two, excluding WTO, golf meeting involved the U.S. president and then executive from South Korea, Japanese, Taiwan companies took place, including Samsung Electronics, SK Group, Hyundai, and LG Group, and even Hana Group vice chairman. This event was likely conducted using the shotgun start method, where teams are assigned to multiple holes and tee off simultaneously, rather than starting from the first hole. This format allows many participants to begin and end the game at the same time, making it popular for a VIP group round that require post-game gathering at the clubhouse. The meeting, reportedly arranged by the SoftBank founder Masayoshi Son, came at a critical time with unresolved tariff negotiation and significant economic interest hanging in the balance for the two allies. It is believed to have provided a key opportunity for Korean executives to directly engage with Trump on various issues in discussion. This marked the first time major Korean conglomerate leaders collectively played golf with a U.S. president and key political and business figures. The executives are believed to have traveled to the golf course via limousine bus instead of personal vehicles.
All right, I see. All right, Professor, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, the international gold spot price, which had hit record highs in recent days, has plunged more than 5%. Spot gold fell to $4,115.26 per ounce as of 1:45 p.m. U.S. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, down about 5.5% from the previous day. This marks the steepest one-day drop in almost 5 years since August 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Gold futures also saw a sharp decline. On the New York Mercantile exchange, December delivery futures closed down 5.7% from the previous day. Following an investigation into Korean nationals suspected of running phishing scams in Cambodia, the South Korean government has called for stronger efforts to deal with related issues. Our Parkinson reports.
Stronger efforts with an extraordinary response, not business as usual, are needed to tackle international fraud cases. That's what President Lee Jae-myung ordered during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, following the recent surge in scam cases linked to Koreans in Cambodia.
국가 권력과도 관계가 있다는 설이 있을 정도이기 때문에 쉽게 뿌리 뽑혀지지는 않을 것 같아요. 인력이든 조직이든 필요하면 최대한 확보해 드릴 테니까 새로운 시각으로 좀 접근해 주시길 바랍니다.
He added he's asked for the National Intelligence Service to get involved, citing the crime's international scope. He also urged cooperation among other relevant authorities, including the Foreign Ministry, to think from a new perspective when dealing with the issue. The Foreign Ministry held a separate meeting the same day to assess the situation and review detailed measures. Officials discussed ways of running the Korea-Cambodia Joint Task Force agreed last week, boosting embassy personnel and strengthening cooperation between police authorities of both countries. Meanwhile, investigations into the repatriated Korean suspects from Cambodia, allegedly involved as perpetrators in phishing schemes targeting fellow Koreans, are picking up speed. As of Tuesday, at least 49 of the 64 people transferred to Korea by Cambodian authorities have been arrested, with more to be added, raising expectations that the probe will gain even greater momentum. 박건우, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, Sanae Takaichi became the country's first female prime minister, marking a historic milestone for Japan and a potential turning point for its politics. Our Pyongyang reports.
Sanae Takaichi, the leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, became Japan's 104th prime minister and the first woman to hold the office since the cabinet system was established 140 years ago. Her rise follows the last-minute coalition deal between the LDP and the conservative Japan Innovation Party, forged after its 26-year alliance with the centrist Komeito collapsed. A longtime conservative within the LDP, Takaichi advocates revising Japan's pacifist constitution, bolstering defense and tightening immigration. She also opposes same-sex marriage and separate surnames for married couples, positions that have stirred debate among moderates and younger voters. While Takaichi's conservative credentials are well known, questions remain about how her ideology will translate into foreign policy, especially when it comes to Korean-Japanese relations. Her past visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, which enshrines Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals, have often drawn criticism from Japan's East Asian neighbors. Yet some analysts say she may soften that stance now that she's taken the country's top office.
Takaichi is known for very conservative orientation towards history issues with Japan's East Asian neighbors. She continued to pay tribute to the war dead, including convicted war criminals at the Yasukuni Shrine. But after the victory as the leader of LDP, she had stopped herself from going to the shrine in person. So it seems like she'll tone down her hawkish stance vis-a-vis Japan's East Asian neighbors on history issues as Japan's prime minister.
South Korea's foreign ministry said it will continue to maintain close communication with the new Japanese administration and work together to sustain positive momentum in bilateral ties. The ministry noted that both countries, as close neighbors and global partners sharing similar interests amid a rapidly changing strategic and trade environment, should keep striving to advance future-oriented relations. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Plans for a Trump-Putin summit in Budapest have been shelved as both Washington and Moscow acknowledged there are no plans for a meeting in the immediate future. The delay follows stalled diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine, with neither side showing signs of compromise. The White House confirmed the pause after a call on Monday between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov resulted in no progress. Lavrov said Russia's position has remained unchanged since the August Alaska summit, when Trump and Putin last met in person. President Donald Trump later told reporters on Tuesday he didn't want a wasted meeting, saying talks would resume only when there is something real to discuss. Vladimir Putin had reportedly proposed trading parts of occupied Kherson and Zaporizhia for control of Donetsk, a plan Trump rejected, urging both armies to stop fighting and go home. In Israel on Tuesday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance downplayed fears that the Israel-Hamas ceasefire could collapse, saying recent progress gives him great optimism the ceasefire is going to hold. Speaking at a joint news conference with Trump envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Vance said he will not set deadlines for Hamas's disarmament or the return of the hostage remains, stressing that both will take a little time. He warned that very bad things could happen if Hamas fails to comply, but said pressure must be balanced with patience. U.S. officials privately fear the truce remains vulnerable after weekend clashes that killed 2 Israeli soldiers and dozens of Palestinians. Vance's trip aims to keep Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu committed to the U.S. brokered deal. Witkoff told Israel counterparts their response to Hamas must stay proportional, as next 30 days will determine whether the peace plan's second phase can begin. In Paris on Tuesday morning, former President Nicolas Sarkozy became the first ex-leader of France since World War II to go to jail. He began a 5-year sentence for conspiring to finance his 2007 campaign with money from late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. The 70-year-old arrived at La Santé prison greeted by supporters shouting his name as police cordoned off the streets. He will be held in an isolation wing for his own safety in a small cell with a bed, desk, shower, and TV, and allowed 1 hour of daily exercise. The former president maintains his innocence, writing on social media that truth will prevail, and his lawyer has filed an immediate appeal for release. President Emmanuel Macron called his predecessor's detention a human matter, while France's justice minister vowed to ensure Sarkozy's safety in jail. In London on Tuesday, a brain surgery patient played the clarinet during her 4-hour brain surgery. 65-year-old Denise Bacon, who suffers from Parkinson's disease, reportedly showed immediate improvement in her finger movement. The surgery at King's College Hospital involved deep brain stimulation using implanted electrodes to ease symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The patient stayed awake under local anesthetic while the neurosurgeon adjusted electrical currents to the affected areas of her brain. Doctors said her hand control improved instantly, allowing her to play the clarinet smoothly on the operating table, something she hasn't done for 5 years.
The sudden early winter chill has certainly made it feel like the season has changed overnight. While we had one last cool start this morning, relief is on the way. Temperatures will jump by over 10 degrees later today, bringing back that mild seasonal autumn weather we have been missing. Meanwhile, the East Coast remains wet with rain expected throughout the day. East of Gangwon-do will see 20 to 60 millimeters. The east coast of Gyeongsang-Bukdo province will see 5 to 40 millimeters. But again, this afternoon, the warm-up is ahead with highs going 1 to 5 degrees higher. Seoul topping out at 19 degrees, Gwangju, Jeju both at 22 degrees. And from tomorrow, we'll finally recover back to the seasonal average with morning temperatures returning to around 10 degrees. The forecast for the rest of the week remains near average, but by early next week, morning temperatures will plunge back down to early winter-like conditions.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.